Thank you both for being here, and I'm sure the chairman told you he had to go vote. He'll be back any minute now, but let me just start. I know you've talked about the integrity and the trafficking in persons report, and I don't know what's been discussed already, but one of the points I've made, this is always an issue when it comes to human rights, and that is the balance between our geopolitical relations and information about potential allies that is embarrassing. And I think you would both concur that, first of all, the trafficking in persons report, a lot of people think about it as just a piece of paper the U.S. government publishes, but it has in fact been impactful. Part of our role here is to shame those who are less than cooperative in the efforts to tackle this, including people here at home, but also governments abroad. And I just think I want to reiterate what appears already been discussed, how critical it is that this report be free from political interference. And to be blunt, the notion that someone could come in and say to the State Department, look, I don't want to change the tiering of a country because we've got a good thing going with them on some other foreign policy issue and we don't want to offend them. And it is my feeling that that occurred in the last report. That cannot happen again. And so our hope is to prevent that from happening. And I would imagine every advocate out there believes that as well. These issues are, especially since we as a nation are also hopefully being honest about our own internal problems with regards to that. And that, the first thing I want to talk about, Mr. Kutcher, is the Thorn website. And again, you may have talked about this already, it may have been asked, and I apologize, but the website talks about people using the internet to share child abuse material are doing so with seemingly low risk of getting caught. So I'm interested in learning how Thorn collaborates with law enforcement in the United States and around the world, especially with countries that have weak criminal justice systems, to change the sort of behavior with impunity of this criminal activity, and at the same time, using that also as a tool to hopefully train law enforcement agencies about victim-friendly procedures. There are places around the world, quite frankly, there have been jurisdictions in the United States that if, for example, someone is being trafficked into prostitution, they are arrested for the crime of prostitution and treated as a criminal as opposed to as a victim. And we've had arguments with law enforcement about that, some of whom argue to us that that's the appropriate way to do it, that's the only way to break them free from the endeavor. In other cases, I've had some disagreements with regards to that. But how is Thorn working to kind of end that cycle of impunity where people think we can do whatever we want, the chances of getting caught are very low, and quite frankly, the penalties in some places are not very high?
Thank you for the question. You know, at its core, one of the issues with sex trafficking, and specifically domestically and most certainly internationally, is the lack of attention that it actually gets from law enforcement. Resources, I should say. You know, most trafficking divisions in police departments across this country are maybe 1 or 2 people, and they're understaffed and underfinanced. And so they really are when we first went in, we were looking at the tools that they were using, and they were going into chat rooms and trying to strike up conversations with traffickers or trafficking victims in order to get leads on investigation. So we saw, and specifically relative to minors, that if we could create a platform or a tool that helped them prioritize their caseload by understanding what we call a maturity score of the victim, we could help get the victims as early as possible out of the system, and as young as possible out of the system first. So we've created this prioritization tool. I'd be happy to show you Spotlight at some point in time. I don't want to reveal too much about it because I don't want to risk the enduring power of the platform. But we help them prioritize their caseload. And basically what we're doing is just taking this internet, which is largely anonymous in many ways, and making it far less anonymous. We can track victims as they get trafficked across state lines. We have investigation tools that allow us to understand the full picture, the full story of the trafficking victim over time and the trafficker over time, which is admissible in court, which is really good evidence in order to prosecute these cases.
And this question is for both of you. It's one of the things that you've heard a lot about, which I find to be one of the most grotesque and outrageous things I've seen, and that's the conduct of Backpage.com. There was a recent article in the Miami Herald that talked about a local organization that's filing a federal lawsuit against Backpage.com, and it found that in my hometown in Miami-Dade, over half the adult victims in human trafficking cases and 40% of minor victims were being advertised on Backpage.com. As you're probably aware, the Senate has also conducted an investigation So with regards to that, and issued a report. So following that report, Backpage has closed the adult section in which advertisers solicited services. However, it's been reported that the ads are now running on the dating section. And some are now asserting, and I agree, that this is nothing more than a publicity stunt. And I would welcome both of you to comment on that change. And in the end, didn't they just change the name of the same activity?
So, you know, this has been happening long before Backpage. I think 6 years ago, I started going after the Village Voice for advertising sex on their platform. And actually, the way I went after them is I went after their advertisers and said, hey, do you know that this is happening? And the advertisers quickly pulled back, and the Village Voice had started to have some issues relative to that. I talked to the founder and the CEO of Backpage 5 years ago and said, we're watching, we know what's happening. I know you know what's happening. You can either join us in the fight against it, or you're going to become the tool for it. And they really sort of didn't want to hear about it. Craigslist, on the other hand, the founder, Craig Newmark, was very willing and interested in fighting this, and was actually distancing himself from what was happening on his platform. We technically watched the traffic move from the adult section to the women seeking men section. We watched it. We analytically watched it happen moments after it was shut down. Moments. So, you know, you look at it and you go, it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? And the only question that we have is, it's not relative to censoring it, it's not relative to shutting down the internet, it's relative to, can we build the tools that are better than their tools to fight what's happening? There are sites in the United States that do this other than Backpage, a lot of them, in fact. There are sites internationally that are doing this, that are other sites. It's happening all over the place. It's been happening for decades in print media. We're now just recognizing it for what it is, and I think that that's the most important part. And secondarily to that is let's build the tools, let's finance the tools, and let's deploy the tools to fight back.
So I think that Backpage has to be held accountable for what they're doing. And one of the things that they're doing right now, there's evidence that shows that they have been doctoring the ads, up to 80% of their ads, to conceal the underlying transaction, meaning that they are not, when they do that, they should not be protected by the law. You know, current law, and there's some good reasons for it, says that internet sites that allow third parties to post aren't responsible for the content of that post. But you don't have to change that law to go after what Backpage is doing right now. It appears that they are intentionally altering ads to make underage people look like they are consenting adults, and that is despicable and wrong, and they should be held accountable for that.